The forest was dark, and the tall trees blocked most of the sunlight. Only thin beams of light broke through the leaves, falling on the damp ground. Lyra's small body was pressed against the rough trunk of a tree, her breath shallow, her little heart racing inside her chest. Her ears twitched at every sound, the rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig, the whisper of the wind. She had been told since she was very young that humans were dangerous. Her people said humans were predators, hunters who devoured anything smaller and weaker than them. She had heard stories of sharp teeth and claws, of voices that lured you closer before they attacked. Those stories kept her alive in the wild, and they kept her far away from humans. But now one of them was here. He stood just a few steps away. Blocking the path, the human was tall, far taller than anyone from her village. His shadow stretched long across the ground, reaching her tiny feet. Lyra's hands shook, and she gripped the small knife she carried, though she knew it would never stop a creature like him. The man's eyes locked onto hers. They weren't the cold, hungry eyes she expected. They were strange, calm, steady, and almost curious. Still, her legs felt heavy, as if the earth itself was holding her in place. Every instinct told her to run, but her body refused to move. The human tilted his head slightly, as though studying her. He didn't move forward, didn't raise his arms, didn't make a sound. For a long moment, the two of them just stared at each other. The forest around them was silent, as if even the wind was waiting to see what would happen. Lyra's breathing grew quicker, the sound loud in her own ears. She imagined him stepping closer, grabbing her, and opening his wide mouth to eat her in one bite. That was how the stories went. But the human did something she had never expected. He spoke. His voice was deep, but not harsh. A sound that rolled through the air and touched her ears in a way she didn't understand. The words meant nothing to her. She didn't know his language, but the tone was soft, almost gentle. Lyra blinked in confusion. This was not what a predator did. She tried to step back, but the tree behind her kept her in place. The human took a slow breath and crouched down so he was closer to her height. Even then, he was still much bigger than her. Her eyes darted to his hands, watching for sudden movements. Instead, he reached behind him and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. Her heart pounded harder. Was it a weapon? A trap? But when he unwrapped it, steam curled into the air. A warm, rich smell drifted toward her, and it made her nose twitch. She had never smelled anything like it. Her stomach made a loud growl before she could stop it. The sound embarrassed her, and she pressed a hand to her belly. The human's mouth curved into the smallest of smiles. He placed the steaming bundle on the ground in front of him, and then leaned back. He didn't push it toward her, didn't make a move to come closer. He just sat there, watching her carefully. The smell was pulling at her, wrapping around her senses. She could almost taste it just by breathing, but the fear in her chest was still strong. If she reached for it, would he grab her? Would the stories come true? The human said something again, his voice slow and calm. The sound was strange, no threat in it. No growl, but she didn't trust it. Her eyes moved from the food to his face. He didn't look like a beast ready to attack. He looked tired, like someone who had been walking for a long time. The air between them was thick with tension. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. A drop of sweat rolled down her forehead. The human didn't blink, didn't move suddenly. He seemed to be waiting for something. Lyra shifted her weight, her little toes curling in the dirt. Her hunger burned at her insides. Every moment she stayed still. The smell of the food seemed stronger. The distance between them was only a few steps, but to her it felt like a great canyon. She didn't know if crossing it would mean safety or her end. The forest gave no answer. The wind was silent. The trees were still. The world was holding its breath. Her knife trembled in her grip. Finally, She took one slow step forward. The human's eyes followed her, but his body stayed relaxed. Another step. The smell was almost overwhelming now. She crouched, keeping her eyes on him, and stretched out her hand toward the bundle. Her fingers brushed the warm cloth. The human didn't move for the first time. She wondered if maybe the stories had been wrong. Lyra didn't sleep that night. Not really. Her small body stayed curled in the shadows of the trees, her eyes fixed on the glowing light of the human's campfire. Every so often she saw him move shifting logs, adding wood, stirring the flames, but never looking directly at her. It was strange, almost suspicious. Predators always stared at their prey. That was what her people told her, yet this one seemed content to ignore her completely. The thought made her chest tighten in a way she didn't understand. When the pale light of morning touched the forest, the human finally rose. His movements were slow, unhurried, as if he didn't feel the danger she felt in every breath. Lyra tensed when he reached for the strange cloth bundle again. She remembered the smell from before, warm, almost irresistible. The growl in her stomach came without warning, louder than she wanted. She pressed her hand over it and hoped he didn't notice, but he did. His eyes flicked toward her hiding spot. And then he crouched. She thought he might come closer, but instead, he reached into his pack and pulled something else out. It was flat and golden brown, edges crisp, steam still rising from it. He placed it gently on a smooth rock, well within her view. Then he stood and stepped back, as though offering it to the forest itself. Lyra narrowed her eyes. This was not how traps worked. Traps hid their bait, buried it, made it look safe until the jaws closed around you. But this was just sitting there, in plain sight, no ropes, no nets, no sharp jaws waiting to snap. She licked her lips without meaning. 2. Her hunger argued with her fear. It whispered that maybe just this one sit was worth the risk. The human spoke again, slow and steady. She didn't understand the words, but something in his tone was softer than yesterday, he was saying. Something important. She could feel it. But how could she believe him? He didn't wait for her to decide. Instead, he turned his back to her and began packing his things. She blinked in surprise. If he truly wanted to catch her, he wouldn't turn away. Predators didn't give up their hunt. Predators didn't act like she wasn't even worth chasing. The strange mix of insult and curiosity twisted in her chest. She crept forward, every step careful, her eyes never leaving his tall figure. Her claws scratched lightly at the rock as she reached for the warm bread. The heat seeped into her fingers. One quick bite, just one, would tell her if it was poisoned or not. She bit. The taste exploded across her tongue, soft inside, crispy outside, a richness she had never known. Her eyes widened before she could stop herself. It was good, too good. Her body trembled as she ate the rest faster than she had meant to. The human glanced over his shoulder. His eyes caught hers, but he didn't approach. He just nodded once for slinging the pack over his shoulder. For a moment, Lyra thought he would walk away forever. And strangely, that thought made her chest feel heavy. He was leaving, and yet something inside her whispered that this was not the last time they would meet. That night, the forest was quiet in a way that felt unnatural. The air was heavy, as if the trees themselves were listening. Lyra sat in the dark, her small frame hidden behind a thick root, watching the humans camp from a safe distance. The fire he built glowed like a small sun, painting his face in shades of gold and red. The shadows danced along the lines of his jaw, making him look less like a monster and more like something she couldn't name. He moved with slow, practiced motions, stirring a pot over the flames. The smell drifted toward her again, warm and heavy, making her stomach ache. She hugged her knees tighter, trying to ignore it. Every so often, He would glance around the forest knot in a hunting way. But like someone making sure the night was safe, he didn't know she was there. Or maybe he did. The thought made her skin prickle. Why wasn't he trying to chase her? Why wasn't he acting like the predator she'd been told he was? Cold, that was the sound he'd said when pointing at himself earlier, sat near the fire and began speaking. At first, she thought he was talking to the flames, but then she realized he was talking to her. Not directly, not looking at her. But his words floated through the night like he knew she could hear them. She didn't understand his language, but his tone was calm. It wasn't sharp. It wasn't threatening. It was almost like a song with no rhythm. The strange sound filled her with an emotion she didn't know how to name. Her eyes grew heavy from the warmth of the firelight and the steady rise and fall of his voice. But she forced herself to stay awake. She had to watch him, had to make sure he didn't move toward her in the dark. Still, when his head slowly dropped forward and his eyes closed, her breath caught. He was sleeping. Her ears twitched, straining for any hint of trickery. But no, his breathing was slow and deep, his body loose. He truly had let his guard down. She crept forward, step by step, the ground soft beneath her bare feet. The fire crackled quietly, each pop sounding like a drum in the silence. Her gaze was fixed on his hands, large, resting by his side, capable of crushing her if he wished. And yet, they didn't move. She found herself just a few steps away now, the warmth of the fire wrapping around her like a blanket. The shadows flickered over his face. And in that moment, she saw something strange. Without the hard set of his eyes, without the towering stance, he looked tired, not dangerous, not hungry, just tired. Her grip on her small blade loosened without her realizing. She stayed there for a long time. Watching him breathe, the idea of turning and running never came. Instead, she sat down quietly in the dark edge of his camp, not close enough to touch, not far enough to leave. When a log shifted in the fire and sent a spray of sparks upward, he stirred. His eyes opened halfway, catching a glimpse of her in the shadows. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, without a word, he closed his eyes again, and, for reasons she didn't understand, that small act made her feel safer than she had in a very long time. The night was colder than before, the kind of cold that sank into bones. Lyra had stayed near the humans' camp, close enough to feel the edge of the fire's warmth. The forest was still, but in the distance, a low, drawn-out howl broke the silence. Her ears snapped upright, her small claws digging into the dirt. She knew that sound it belonged to night hunters, the kind that roamed in packs. They were fast, cunning, and hungry. If they caught her alone, she wouldn't stand a chance. The human Cole was already on his feet. He turned his head toward the sound, its expression changing from calm to sharp in a heartbeat. He didn't even glance at her hiding spot, but somehow, she felt he knew exactly where she was. The howls came again. This time closer, leaves rustled, and glowing eyes began to appear in the shadows beyond the fire. One pair, then two, then 5, circling, slow and deliberate. Lyra's chest tightened. This was it. He'd save himself and leave her, just like anyone else would. But Cole didn't move away. He stepped forward instead, placing himself between her and the advancing predators. She gripped her tiny blade, but it felt useless compared to the danger before them. Cole reached to his side and pulled out a strange object, long, dark, and smooth, with one quick motion. He raised it to his shoulder. The night split open with a deafening roar. Flashes of fire erupted from the weapon's mouth. The first shot sent 2 of the hunters scattering. The others froze, startled by the sudden burst of noise and light. Lyra flinched at every blast, but her eyes stayed locked on him. The firelight caught in his eyes, making them look fierce and unshakable. He moved with precision, forcing the predators back step by step. Each shot echoed through the trees until, The howls faded into the distance. Silence returned, heavy and almost unreal. The only sound left was the faint hum of the fire and her own heartbeat. Cole lowered the weapon slowly, his gaze sweeping the dark edges of the forest to be sure they were gone. Then, without turning to face her, he spoke, his tone calm again. She didn't understand the words, but something about them made her shoulders loosen. It was over. He had protected her without hesitation. Without asking for anything, she didn't know why, but for the first time, the idea that he might not be her enemy began to take root. Morning came soft and pale, the kind of light that made the forest seem less like a threat and more like a secret. Lyra sat on a fallen log, her legs drawn up. Watching Cole move around the camp, he wasn't hunting. He wasn't looking for her. He was simply working. He packed his gear, checked his strange weapon, and then began making something over the fire. The smell rose again, warm and rich, curling through the air until it wrapped around her senses. She hated that it made her mouth water. Predators weren't supposed to smell like safety. When he noticed her watching, he didn't move toward her. Instead, he crouched low, making himself smaller. He pointed to the food, then to her, and said a single word slowly. She tilted her head, trying to make sense of it. He repeated it, tapping his chest, then the food again. It was strange, like a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. Finally, he broke off a small piece, placed it on a flat rock halfway between them, and stepped back. No sudden movements. No rush, just waiting. Lyra crept forward, her bare feet whispering against the leaves. She took the piece, sniffed it, then bit into it. Warmth spread through her mouth, and for a moment, her eyes fluttered shut when she opened them. He was smiling, not in a sharp, mocking way, but in something softer. She didn't understand why that made her chest feel tight. He pointed at her and said another word. Then he pointed at himself and said, "Cole." The sound was simple enough that she repeated it without thinking. His eyebrows lifted in surprise. She frowned, but tried again. "Cole," she said, this time with more certainty. He laughed, not a cruel laugh, but one that seemed to shake some of the tension out of the air. Her ears twitched, unsure if she liked the sound or not. Still, something about it made her want to try more. He picked up a smooth stick and began drawing shapes in the dirt. A circle, a line, a little figure, her. She realized, then, a taller figure, him. He pointed between them and said a word, slow and clear. She repeated it, stumbling over the strange shape of the sound. This time, they both laughed. It wasn't much, but it was something, and for the first time, the fear wasn't the only thing keeping her near him. Days began to blur together in the quiet rhythm of the forest. Lyra no longer stayed hidden. All the time she walked openly in the space between her world and his. In the mornings, Cole would cook, the smell of strange but wonderful foods drifting through the air. She would bring berries or roots she knew were safe, placing them near his fire without a word. Sometimes he'd use them in his meals. Other times he'd hand her something new in return. It was a silent trade at first, but slowly their hands began to brush when they passed things. She didn't flinch anymore. Not every time. One afternoon, she found him working on her torn tunic. The fabric was mended with neat, careful stitches. He held it out to her without ceremony, just a small nod. She took it, surprised by the warmth building in her chest. Her people never wasted time fixing old clothes, they threw them away. But this human had sat there, weaving thread through fabric for someone who was supposed to be afraid of him. In return, she showed him the streams where the water ran clean. She pointed out plants that could heal a cut and leaves that kept the insects away. He listened to every word, repeating her strange language until he could get close to the sound. They laughed when he mispronounced something, and even though she tried to hide it, she liked hearing him try. The more they worked together, the less the old stories fit in her head. The humans her people had described were cruel, greedy and dangerous, but Cole was none of those things. He didn't take what wasn't his. He didn't hurt the weak, he protected them. And when he looked at her, it wasn't with hunger, but with something she couldn't name. Something that made her chest feel lighter and heavier at the same time. The day the other humans came, the air felt wrong long before they appeared. Birds had gone silent, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Lyra's ears twitched at the sound of heavy boots on the forest floor. She ducked behind a fallen log, her heart pounding through the gaps in the bark. She saw them three. Humans, armed and scanning the trees. Their faces were colder than Cole's. Their eyes sharp in a way that made her fur prickle. Cole stepped forward to meet them, his voice low but firm. She couldn't understand the words, but his stance told her enough. He was trying to keep them from looking too closely, but one of the strangers moved toward her hiding place. Her breath caught. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to disappear into the trees, yet her feet refused to move. The man's gaze landed on her, and his brow furrowed. Cole stepped between them in an instant. His tone sharper now, they argued in quick bursts of sound, the air between them tense. Then Cole turned his head slightly. Meeting her eyes from across the space, "You decide," he said, slow enough that she understood. Her chest tightened. This was her choice: run and never see him again, or step out and trust him fully. Her legs trembled as she stood. The other human's eyes widened at her sudden appearance. She walked to Cole's side, every step heavy but certain. When she reached him, her small hand slid into his. The warmth of his grip closed around hers, steady and sure for a heartbeat. The forest seemed to breathe again. She looked up at him and saw no predator, no monster, only the one who had kept her safe, and for the first time, she knew her fear had been wrong from the very beginning.